Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome back to another live stream where, would you believe it, I am going to talk about Silvery Barbs. I know a lot of people have already talked about Silvery Barbs, but I've done a bit of research. I actually used the spell for quite some time, so I actually have a lot of actual experience with the spell. So that means I should be able to talk from experience rather than theoretically, which is exactly what we want, right? We want the actual facts. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to run a poll today. Feel free to take part. My suggestion to you is grab some food, some drink, get comfortable, and then we'll go from there. And I will tell you everything that I learned while we play tested Silvery Barbs and give you my perspective. All right, now that that's done, we're going to go into this pretty quick. Hello. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Generally because I always talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons 5e, I'm going to talk about why I believe Silvery Barbs is the best spell in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. That's right, the best spell out there that you could possibly use. I can't think of another spell that is more useful than Silvery Barbs. And I've had a chance to actually play test it. So my Dungeon Master was kind enough to allow me to play through for a number of months. We play every week, and therefore I had an opportunity to collect as much data about the spell and learn how to use it. And I'm going to explain to you how to use it. I'm going to also explain to you some of the pitfalls of using the spell and some of the things that are quite amazing about the spell, and then I'll give you a full summary of my opinion. Now this is certainly intended as a player guide, but you will also find it very useful as a Dungeon Master, I believe, so feel free to stick around. I have lots to say. Anyway, now that we've covered all of that, let's get into the real topic, which is what do I actually have to say about this spell? And there's an awful lot to say about this spell. Well, first off, for those of you, no, this is in the Strixhaven book. This spell is a first level spell. Curriculum of Chaos is not my favourite book, but certainly this spell stands out amongst all of them. I'm going to go over it very quickly in terms of how the spell works. It's got a range of 60 feet, so as a reaction, that's right, as a reaction, which you take when a creature you can see within 60 feet of yourself succeeds on an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw, and essentially every d20 roll there is in the game. It covers all of them, including a death saving throw. Okay, so you can cover all of those things if you really wanted to. As long as that's taking place, you can use this to affect, and you're going to be using it as a player to affect your Dungeon Master monsters. And if you are a Dungeon Master, you'll be trying to use it to affect your player characters. Now, the effect is, once this is triggered, which is easy to do, just about everything the Dungeon Master does is going to trigger this, and everything that the players do is going to trigger this, you get to, that targeted creature has to re-roll the d20 and use the lower result. Okay? So that's really helpful. If they already had advantage, then you can apply like disadvantage to that roll, essentially. And in some respects, it's like getting the worst case scenario of all of the rolls, because it's not actually disadvantage, so it doesn't cancel it out. Which is one of the weird things, is the interplay between advantage and disadvantage. Now, that's just the first thing that you can do with it. There's a secondary effect as well, which means that you can you select a different creature, usually your ally, whoever's casting the spell, you choose them, and that creature gets advantage on their next attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. So every single d20 roll in the game for 1 minute, and they have to apply it to the first d20 roll that they make. Okay? Now, the only problem is you can't apply Silvery Barbs to the same dice roll more than once. So if you're going to use it, you only get one shot at this, and if it's not successful, then you missed out. But you've got two different effects, and it's a first level spell. So what did I find out about this ultimately through my experience playing with it? Well, first off, players can potentially influence every D20 dice roll that a Dungeon Master makes after the result is known. So you actually have to know what the result is, because part of the wording of the spell states that the creature who's triggering this, they have to have succeeded on the attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. So that means you know what the end result of that dice roll is. You might not know what the numerical value is, but you know if they succeeded or failed. And if your Dungeon Master tells you that they had a critical hit, then of course you know it's a critical hit. They may not tell you that, but it's beside the point. You know the outcome is success. Something that a lot of other features don't necessarily do. So it's actually quite strong in that sense. The Dungeon Master can also use the spell, but probably not as often as the player's characters. Now, why is that? Because players will control more spellcasters. It is not normal for a Dungeon Master to have multiple spellcasters operating at the same time. So if you have more than one character played by a player in the game, then you'll probably find that there's more opportunities to pick up Silvery Barbs. It's not actually that difficult to get the spell, frankly. It's actually very, very easy, provided that it's available in your game. And this is a spell that you can use in Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League. So organised, open, public play. The Dungeon Master can also use Silvery Barbs, but here's the, and this is one of the arguments that I know that a lot of people have said, but what have we found is that that's not going to happen. One, because the Dungeon Master is not going to be rocking out spellcasters all the time, but not every encounter will have an enemy mage or a monster where Silvery Barbs is appropriate and makes sense to have Silvery Barbs attached to that monster. That would have to be a homebrew sort of a thing going on there. And a lot of extra work for a Dungeon Master that I may not want to do. In fact, I would say the majority of monster encounters I've found did not involve a spellcaster. So unless you're in a campaign when there's a lot of enemy spellcasters, then Dungeon Masters aren't necessarily going to be doing this. So when people say, but you know, Dungeon Masters can also use it, well, usually Dungeon Masters won't be using it because there isn't really an opportunity to do so without breaking the narrative of the story. Okay, now the next thing I noticed is that picking your opportunity to use Silvery Barbs is important, okay? Particularly with the secondary effect where you give advantage to one of your allies, whoever it is, okay? Whether you're the player or the Dungeon Master. Silvery Barbs, that spell, can give a rogue sneak attack if they don't already have advantage on that attack roll and there's no disadvantage involved, which is awesome. Or if there's no ally within 5 feet. Now you will say, well, that's probably not going to come up very often, but we actually found it came up quite a lot in my game. Just given the, an open enough area, if you've got a very tight, confined space, that's possible. But if you've got an open, exploring wilderness area, or you're on the open seas as a pirate like we were, then it's easy to find yourself in a situation as a rogue where you can get into position, but you don't have advantage and you don't have an ally within 5 feet. And so Silvery Barbs, if you're casting this is the thing you want to do, is you want to give it to your rogue because it just makes them much more likely to get a critical, and also they can use their sneak attack damage to get more damage. And that's always a good thing, right? Paladins. The thing I noticed with a paladin is if you give them an advantage on their next attack or whatever D20 dice roll they make, they've got to be very careful about what they roll, of course. But here's the thing, Silvery Barbs give them a greater chance to get a hit. Now when they hit or they critical, in particular when they get a critical hit, but even if they hit, well, that's when they use their smite. Now if you're dealing with a really tough fight, you'll use your smite whether you're getting a critical hit or not. Most fights are only between 1 and 5 rounds, and then it's over and done, okay? And that's one of the things that I found is that it's picking those moments to use the spell where it's really going to do the most work. Initially, when I was using the spell, I would use Silvery Barbs every time the Dungeon Master succeeded on an attack roll, a saving throw, or any kind of ability check or a skill check of some kind, to just mess with my Dungeon Master as much as possible. And one of the things I found is that didn't always help me. Sometimes it was better to actually wait for that right moment, okay, and then get it done. My group also had more than one caster with Silvery Barbs. There was 2 of us, okay? But Paladins are always a good target for that secondary effect, giving them an advantage on their attack or their next d20 dice roll. It also means that when you tell them, you need to make it clear to them that they need to be careful what dice roll they make first. Otherwise, they wind up with Silvery Barbs being applied to the dice roll that you didn't really want them to apply it to. So you need to think about what they're doing. I would say also forcing a Dungeon Master to have their monsters re-roll a saving throw, attack rolls for powerful attacks in particular. So whether it's a saving throw that's involved, that the monster's forced into making, that's actually like a good time, depending on what it is. And then if the monster is making an attack, then it's a really powerful attack, then that's a good time to use Silvery Barbs. Spells, obviously, monster abilities that can be triggered. They're not always going to work because, remember, you're essentially lowering the dice roll rather than increasing the dice roll. So you've got to pick your moment, right? It's a huge advantage to player characters if they are using Silvery Barbs. It shut down potentially anything that my Dungeon Master could do. Really, the monsters did nothing. And when we had really deadly situations where we knew we were not going to make it, and normally we would have been pulverized, we survived. And we actually got through the encounter and did pretty well, frankly. And, we also had 2 people casting Silvery Barbs, so that sort of made a big difference. So there's an awful lot going on here that I found that was really interesting. Considering a lot of people have voiced that, applying a re-roll to these things isn't a big deal, or getting advantage for an ally is not a big deal. The same thing happens with inspiration. We'll get to that. I have more to say. Now, another thing I did notice is that we have a monk in our group, and a monk that uses their stunning strike and doesn't succeed in getting that stunning strike to work, okay? Right, because guess what? The monsters saved. They were successful and saved. This is the time you use Silvery Barbs. It significantly increases the chance of stunning strike working on a monster when Silvery Barbs is cast. So that's the time you do it. And then you're going to back that up by applying advantage to somebody within range who's an ally, who's going to have the most clout. And it's not necessarily going to be the monk, but certainly affecting a stunning strike that was not successful and actually activating. So the Dungeon Master's monster was successful on their saving throw. That's when you want to use your Silvery Barbs. Silvery Barbs, as we looked at the spell, we were trying to work out how it would interact with the lucky feat. And what we determined is that the Silvery Barbs supersedes the dice rolls when applying the lucky feat. Because Silvery Barbs is applied after the result is actually determined, whereas the lucky feat only applies before you know the outcome of that dice roll. So you can't use the lucky feat to get rid of the effect of the Silvery Barb spell. Interesting. And that actually brought up a lot for me. We were starting to sort of look at how does the halfling lucky ability work now? And its interplay is much more complicated, and I won't try to explain it here because we realized that there were times when it would work and times when it wouldn't work, because halfling luck is different to the lucky feat. It works differently, so therefore the effect is different and way too complicated to explain, so I'm not going to bother. Silvery Barbs is better than inspiration dice. Now, why are you saying this, Fred? Well, here's my rationale. Because you get 2 different effects from the spell. Silvery Barbs does 2 different things, whereas inspiration is really only doing one thing. You get to re-roll all d20s. Now, inspiration is applied to any d20 roll. So, okay, that's on par. But it's also applied to any d20 roll that the Dungeon Master makes. right? Any D20 roll that the Dungeon Master makes if you're dealing with Dungeon Master and the players are using Silvery Barbs. It's a huge advantage, okay? Now, why is this? Because normally when you apply inspiration and you have inspiration assigned to your character, you can give inspiration to yourself, okay, on a D20 roll. You can give inspiration to another person in your party or group, and you know, so they get advantage on a dice roll, a D20. It could be any D20 roll, that's fine. And you can also use it to get rid of disadvantage on yourself or somebody else because you're applying advantage over the top of disadvantage and it cancels out. So this is the normal approach, right? But inspiration does not allow you to affect the Dungeon Master's dice, not unless you're homebrewing. That's the difference between inspiration. Now, is inspiration much like the effect that you're getting from Silvery Barbs, the secondary effect where you give advantage to an ally? Yes, it is, but it's nothing like the first effect, which is really the one that counts to a large extent with regard to comparing the two. Here we go. Another thing that I found was interesting, and that is a party with more than one player character that has Silvery Barbs can counter multiple monster attacks, because not every single attack the monsters make is going to be significant. So if you are experienced and you know what you're doing, you pick the ones that are going to be significant. So you look at what is the toughest, biggest, and hardest hitting thing, and that's usually the thing you target. If a critical hit comes up, then you're going to affect that, right? And that's what I found is between myself and the other player, we were able to shut down multiple monster attacks, even when we were significantly outnumbered, and we were fine. And the effect on the game was quite significant. Using Silvery Barbs will burn through your level 1 spells really fast. Here's the thing that I thought was even more entertaining. As I got more experienced using the spells and realized what was going on with the game and how much of a benefit it was to us, I started using higher level slots. Yes, I started using level 2 slots and contemplating, but the opportunity did not arise, to use level 3 slots, but you will go through them much faster than normal. So you will burn through those spell slots super quick. Now, probably not so much of a big deal if you're at higher level, but at a lower level to mid-range, I found at lower level you do go through them very fast, which means Silvery Barbs results in a lot more resting. You need to go and take a lot more short rest, but more often it's a long rest to get everything back. I was playing a wizard, so we have arcane recovery, so we can get half our wizard level back worth of spell slots, but it's often not enough because you're using so many. And if your combats are going longer than between 1 and 3 rounds, then you'll burn through even more. I found myself many times casting Silvery Barbs as a reaction every round. Like it was common that I would just use it every single time. Now, to be fair, I did this in the attempt to see if I could get the spell banned as fast as possible. And I got it banned within 3 hours, but we allowed it to keep going for months to keep playtesting it. So yes, I think my group were quite impressed at how ruthless I was with that spell. Okay, next thing. There's another spell that people start talking about, and there's a whole bunch of spells actually. Shield. Let's talk about Shield. Shield and Absorb Element spell are much more situational than the Silvery Barbs spell, which covers pretty much every scenario. Like, Shield only applies to you, the caster who has Shield, that you can cast Shield on. It only applies to an attack roll that made against you, okay? So therefore, as a result of that, the only time it's really useful is when you are targeted with an attack roll. I found, as a wizard in the back line, that I was not getting targeted, so I didn't need to use Shield, so I could use Silvery Barbs. It just didn't come up. Now, if you built a fighter with the use of Shield and they're in the front line and you're trying to use Shield to protect yourself, I totally understand. Silvery Barbs probably wouldn't make as much sense. But that's a very specific build, and very few people do that sort of thing. Really, the vast majority of people are going to be in the back line with a spellcaster at range and pumping out Silvery Barbs, rather than you won't find yourself having to use shield. Not unless your Dungeon Master manages to figure out how to target you and they have monsters that have ranged attacks. That's not always going to be the place. I was quite careful about where I would position myself so I could affect the battlefield, but I was probably well covered. And of course you use mage armor, which lasts for 8 hours, so you're pretty sweet. It's all right. Absorb elements, again, very situational. I found it never came up. There was never a situation where I felt like it would have been more useful to cast absorb elements than to use Silvery Barbs. Now, what you do find with Silvery Barbs is you find yourself in this strange role suddenly of being a buffer. Like, your job now seems to be to support the rest of the party in their success, which is actually quite cool. But the other thing I found is that, like, what do I do with myself? Because you run through the spell slots so quickly. And I'll explain what wound up happening. You'll be surprised what I wound up doing. A lot of people at the table were like they're looking at me odd. And my Dungeon Master pointed out when we finally wrapped this up that he knew exactly what was going on, and he noticed what was going on in terms of what I was doing with the spell and how I was casting my spells. I actually found myself casting a lot of cantrips, and I'll explain what I did in terms of that very shortly. A party that has a caster with Silvery Barbs can deal with much harder combat encounters. I certainly found that to be the case. I think that's a definitive. The other thing is that Dungeon Master monsters just don't hit as often, and they'll miss much more. Now, monsters usually don't hit as often as player characters anyway, just because of how the game is built. So suddenly, when you apply the ability to force a monster to miss more often, it surprisingly, particularly if you've got smaller groups of monsters, or you've got to deal with a larger creature where you can actually target them. Silvery Barbs against a dragon really messes things up. Silvery Barbs seems to be better with high-level characters. Well, become even better, should I say. So, correct that. Silvery Barbs seems to get better with higher-level characters. And that seems to be, as far as I can tell, I cannot be sure of that, but that's what I seem to get the impression from what I was playing. It's because that you're able to affect more powerful spells and attacks. So then suddenly this little level 1 spell, Silvery Barbs, or level 2 if you decided to cast it with a level 2 slot or a level 3 slot, suddenly becomes super useful. It's the difference between success and failure, right? Imagine somebody casts Banishment and the Dungeon Master succeeds. And then you force them to re-roll that, because you can see them and you're within 60 feet, Silvery Barbs it, and they have to re-roll the saving throw, and now they fail. Like, core blimey, that monster's gone. It just got banished. It's gone. It's out of play. So this is why I'm saying this. But I haven't play tested enough at higher level to be able to do that. It's a little bit of speculation on my part. Okay. I used Silvery Barbs with high level slots, as I already said. I can assure you that you won't miss the level 2 slots. Certainly didn't worry about the level 1 slots at all. And level 3 slots were ready to go. I was like, because often if you're a wizard and you have Fireball, you solve most situations, you Fireball and counter over, right? Unless, of course, the Dungeon Masters tweaked it and done something a little bit more interesting, which, of course, they're allowed to do, and they can do, and they should do. But I found that ultimately there are situations where Fireball don't solve a problem, and if you can get Silvery Barbs in there and you don't have any level 1 slots or level 2 slots, then losing a level 3 slot to Silvery Barbs is just not a big deal, particularly if you shut something down. Remember, we're not talking about comparing this to something like Counterspell. I will talk about Counterspell in a second. Okay, let's keep moving, shall we? Okay, One of the things that you probably already know, and people have already mentioned this, is that Silvery Barbs doesn't override a monster's legendary resistance. It's already been clarified by Jeremy Crawford. I don't need to say anything more. So I didn't think that there was anything special to say about that. I just thought I'd point it out. I would use a level 3 slot to cast Silvery Barbs over Counterspell in the right situation, where Counterspell will not just automatically shut down a spell. Now, what does that mean? Because you might be thinking, well, there are certain criteria that are required where a Dungeon Master will allow you to use Counterspell. You probably got to see the caster. You may, in fact, also need to be able to have a good idea of what they're trying to cast, because if you just cast Counterspell at level 3 and they cast a spell at a higher level, then you're gonna have a dice roll involved anyway, right? There's a chance of success, chance of failure, just like Silvery Barbs. But I found myself in a situation where there were times where Counterspell might not be the right choice. I wouldn't say there were a lot, but it could come up. As a general rule, I would say if I'm dealing with a spell and I've got a reasonable good idea what it is, and it is a spell and not a spell-like effect, okay, then if it's an actual spell where I can use Counterspell, I probably will be using Counterspell over Silvery Barbs. But Silvery Barbs covers every saving throw and every attack roll and every ability check and every skill check, and Counterspell doesn't. So Counterspell is actually not as good at shutting things down, because it only shuts down spells, and that's it. And only spells that you know are taking place. But again, like Silvery Barbs, you need to know where the target is. You need to sort of know what's going on. If you don't have line of sight, it's not going to work. And this is one of the things you will find with Silvery Barbs. You need to make sure you're close enough and you've got line of sight. I found that every time I used Silvery Barbs, or anybody else in the group used Silvery Barbs on a critical hit, every time I used it, it shut down that critical hit. Like the Dungeon Master couldn't roll another 20. It wasn't like they were going to get to roll 2 20s in a row. I'm sure it's possible mathematically, but realistically, it never really happened at my table. So, mate, it's done its job. Critical hits can do a lot of damage, and if you can shut those things down, great. If you can even make it potentially miss, even better. So that's what I found. Critical hits, best time to use Silvery Barbs. It's very easy to get Silvery Barbs by the Fey Touched Feat. But, I mean, even if you're not using the Fey Touched Feat in your campaign or adventure, or you don't have access to it, then multi-classing's not a big deal. Like, the Bard has access to it. The Sorcerer can get it. The Wizard can get the spell. They're all on their spell list. Unless, of course, you're making this game very specific and the spell list is not expanded to Silvery Barbs in the game that you're running. But at Adventurers League, it's not a big deal as far as I can tell. Silvery Barbs makes, one of the things that we did sort of discuss quite a lot, is that we at the end we came to the conclusion that Silvery Barbs makes no narrative sense. It's very poor story-wise. I know I've seen people come up with some convoluted reason why it works the way it does and how it works in a narrative sense, but it's extremely poor narratively. Now, is that enough to get rid of it? Maybe, maybe not. Frankly, is it hugely important? I don't know, but narratively, it's very, very poor as a spell. It does feel like basically a spell that does something extremely powerful and very cool. Another thing that became very obvious, and we discussed this, there are 2 other spells out there that fall into this. They are basically dueling spells, and Silvery Barbs is a dueling spell where it works really well when you're dealing with other spellcasters, and there's that back and forth. So somebody tries to cast a spell and you try to interrupt it. Shield is like that, but Shield only works against attacks, okay, spell attacks, and other attacks as well. But Shield only deals with attack rolls. And then Counterspell deals with spells, but if you're doing other things as well, and it's not an actual spell, then Silvery Barbs kicks into. So I feel like Silvery Barbs falls into this little subgroup of some of the best spells out there. Shield is one of the best spells at level 1 out there. Counterspell is impressive. It's better than what we used to do with Dispel Magic, where we had to use Dispel Magic on our turn, not as a reaction, but on our turn to get rid of a magical effect. And if there was an instantaneous spell being cast at us, we could not use Dispel Magic to get rid of it. It was too late. You couldn't stop those in its tracks. And Counterspell in 5e has done that. And Counterspell and Shield are one of the strongest spells out there. If there's any spell out there that's OP, it's probably those. Followed very closely behind by Fireball, in my opinion. And I'm sure somebody else will come out with some other spells. I mean, Matthew Mercer's got a few things that are floating around that are a bit out there as well. Silvery Barbs, for me, I think is probably the most useful and strongest and most versatile spell I've ever seen. Because this is what wound up happening at my table. I would cast Silvery Barbs on my Dungeon Master's turn every time that they succeeded, okay, on an attack roll, a saving throw, or ability check, or a skill check, where I needed, or we as the group needed it to be effective. And I picked my moments. Every single time. Every single time. In some cases, the other player was doing it as well. So when my time came round, I started to look at the fact that I was burning through my spells so fast, so I made this strange decision to cast a cantrip with my action, of all things. I did not cast a damage dealing cantrip just for the sake of I'm level 1 and that's all I have. No, I had other spells. I had spell slots there. But I didn't cast Magic Missile. No, what was the point? Magic Missile's good. It's guaranteed to hit. As long as you can see your target does a little bit of damage. But my party members around me could do far more than something like Magic Missile could. Scorching Ray. There were other spells out there. Chromatic Orb. I mean, Fireball is one of those things where, yeah, it's probably going to finish the encounter. But there were some situations where, So every turn, I would cast Firebolt or a damage dealing cantrip on my turn as an action, and then I would wait for the Dungeon Master to do something with their monsters and pick my time, and I would target once with my reaction Silvery Barbs on one of their things that they were trying to do and foil it. Not every single time, but the vast majority of times. Then I would select the person who needed it the most. Sometimes somebody was needing to make death saving throws, and it was a brutal situation, and I'd give them advantage on that roll. Surprisingly, they got back up, or they didn't die. If they had to make a saving throw ongoing that was really debilitating, whatever condition was applied to them, I would give them the secondary benefit, advantage to my ally. It made sense. I was picking out the rogue, the paladin, the monk at certain times. Monk, stunning strike, rogue, sneak attack. There are other situations that would arise. So ultimately in the end, it was, I have to say, hard to see the spell leave my group. But this is actually why my group banned Silvery Barbs from Dungeons & Dragons for our table. I don't care what you do at your table, frankly. I never have. I just give people options. I just explain stuff. You make the final decision. It's always going to be that case. But if anybody's told me that Silvery Barbs is not OP and not like the best spell in the game, I would say rubbish, because it is. And I know somebody's going to say, well, Wish, yeah. How many people ever get Wish? Come on. It's a level 1 spell. Even if it was a level 2 spell, I wouldn't care. It could be a level 3 spell, I wouldn't care. It's so good. Now, I would like to preface this, that when our group had made that decision, I would say a good three months, maybe 4 months had passed, playing every week. We had a little bit of a break over Christmas. Everybody agreed that the spell was too good and it needed to be banned. there was only one person who didn't want it to go. And the reason that she didn't want it to go is because it was so good, it had saved our bacon so many times, and was instrumental in our success. And there in itself, we knew that there was a problem. And so the final decision was actually, we overruled that one person. That's what our group did. Now, this is one of these funny times where I don't normally discuss things like this, but I kind of felt like this is the one time that maybe I should. And so I have. I'm hoping this was useful to you. As I said, I'm talking from experience. I've actually used the spell many, many times. And I'm hoping that it'll be useful to you as a player if you're going to use it, or as a dungeon master if you're going to have it in your game. Or you're not going to have it in your game. You make your decision. Now, if you like what I do and you want to support the channel, just watch more of my videos. That's fine. There's plenty out there. Lots of things on spells. If you are a dungeon master or a player, I have hundreds of videos covering every aspect of Dungeons & Dragons, 5e and other roleplay games. If you want to support the channel, you can through Patreon. The Amazon affiliate links down in the description, the merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos, or just share my videos, that's fine too. Or just watch them. Just watch them. Just watch them. Make sure to do the usual YouTube things. What is it? Share, like, subscribe, hit the bell button to be notified when I go live. I go live every week, and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. And if you can, get Silvery Barbs. Pardon me. Kind of my throat's disappearing a little bit on me. Okay, so it is time to go into the chat. This is your opportunity to ask some questions, give some feedback. Please be civil in this discussion. Okay, I do not want to see people losing their nut at me. Please. I don't care whether it's a player or dungeon master. Please do not lose my nut. So, if you're a player and you're trying to figure out how to use the spell, you know now. And if you were a dungeon master trying to figure out how to use the spell, now you know. And if you're not, and you've just decided whether you want to have the spell in the game or not, well, you know. So, let's have a look at this poll. This poll says, so are you using Silvery Barbs in your Dungeons & Dragons 5e game? Okay. Now, will the effect in your game be the same for everybody? I don't know that you'll necessarily have the same effect in your game at your game table compared to my game table. I have a lot of power gamers in my group, but I also have a lot of role players. We're kind of a mix. We've been doing it a long time. We use everything. So 42% have said yes, they use Silvery Barbs in the game. 26 have said no. 12 have said sometimes. I kind of suspected that may be the case. I know a lot of people like to make Silvery Barbs setting specific or only available in certain circumstances. Yeah, okay. And there are 21 who are undecided about whether they should have Silvery Barbs in their game. Okay, so let's work our way through the chat. Probably the smartest way to ensure I don't miss you is to put down hashtag question. I'll put that in. I'm not going to read out every comment because I can just imagine what's been written in there. Hashtag question, please. Yeah. Do not fall into the assumption that any kind of abuse to anybody, even including myself, I will let go. So you be civil, otherwise it's not going to go well. Okay. Right, let's have a look. Is my eyes working? Okay, so Colborne Thunderhammer, hello. Now, Colborne thinks that it's a bad spell. Okay. Yeah. I mean, if the feed is available, that's true. I mean, I've already said that. That's fine. Well, so one of the things you've got to understand is Silvery Barbs cannot be applied more than once to a particular dice roll. So if the players are making a Dungeon Master re-roll a saving throw or an attack roll, they can only apply that Silvery Barb spell once. If somebody else has Silvery Barbs and the first one didn't work, they can't try to do it again. It only gets applied once. So you get one person, one chance, that's it. Abilities were not meant to be stacked in 5e. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. Okay. Buried Axe Blade. How's it going? I'd prefer it takes 1d12 off their success. So you want to adjust it or modify it. Okay. Okay, so one of the things that there was a discussion about, like, if everybody uses it and you're using Silvery Barbs, even 1 or 2 people, the game slows down. The game does slow down. It doesn't actually slow down that fast, but then at my games, at my table, we have group initiative, so our games run very fast anyway. I know that the Dungeon Master was voicing the game seems to be slowing down in terms of how he was seeing it. For me, it wasn't. I think initially when we were getting used to using the spell in the game, it was. Absolutely. But once you start using the spell and, it's shutting down stuff, it actually isn't. Because guess what? Somebody doesn't have to worry about adding up damage dice anymore. Because it didn't succeed. Or there's no spell effect to actually describe to the player if it didn't, whatever they were trying to do didn't come off. Okay? So initially, yes, there's a slowdown, and then after that, once you get used to using the spell, there really isn't. It's minuscule in terms of how it slows the game down. All right. So what else have you got here? So yeah, if you're a high enough level, that's one of the things, because you get so many spells at higher levels, it's actually kind of difficult to run out of spell slots. So you just burn through the level 1 spells and then level 2 spells and level 3 spells and just keep going. Frankly, what's the big deal? You're usually going to be trucking out your big spells anyway. You may not be starting off with your 9th level spell, but you might be at least starting with your 8th level spell for some of these encounters, particularly if you're playing at high level. But a lot of people aren't really playing at really high levels, so they're never going to experience that anyway. But I do agree that a wizard or a bard or a sorcerer can affect pretty much every saving throw that the Dungeon Master has to make at this point now. An extra errata, they need to remove the saving throws from, otherwise it needs to be banned. I don't know that that's going to happen. Do I think there's a place for this spell? I think there is. I think that in Strixhaven, where you're dealing with a lot of mages and there's a lot of dueling, then Silvery Barbs makes actually a lot of sense. Honestly, I think that's probably the only time. When you're having like a Harry Potter, when you're not dealing with monsters, where you're having spellcaster against spellcaster duels, then actually Silvery Barbs makes a lot of sense to the game. I know that sounds strange, but since that's not the game we were playing at my table, and it may not be the game that's being played at your table, but if you are, then actually Silvery Barbs kind of works. So, okay. So you're saying that even the bards cutting words didn't allow saving throws. So, no, the bards cutting words is not as good as Silvery Barbs. I agree. That's true. Fortune's Favour. I know somebody mentioned Fortune's Favour. No, Fortune's Favour is not as good as this spell. It just isn't as good. It just doesn't cover as much. Sorry, I don't agree. Anybody who starts bringing up Fortune's Favour. Experiencing Vietnam. Hello, how's it going, Experiencing Vietnam? How are you doing? Big Kid, nice to hear from you. Hope to get to chat with you again later on sometime. Anyway, I don't know, maybe not today, maybe another day. My ears are still ringing from how hard I brought down the ban hammer on the spell. Did you really, Big Kid? Oh dear. Do you know, that spell, if you're a player, creates a lot of work for a Dungeon Master. It's a lot of fun as a player. I mean, seriously, having that spell there is so much fun. I mean, there's a sort of like a sick gratification and glee in being able to just ruin the Dungeon Master's day with that spell. And yes, I did. And my Dungeon Master was very good about it. Because there was a little bit of laughter on my part and other people's at times. Not every time, but yeah. So I do kind of understand. What the only way to counter everything your party, the win button is to give everything legendary saves. Yeah. No, well, that would be ridiculous. No, that's not going to happen. And the backlash would be immense to do legendary saving throws to, yeah. And it's not just saving throws. I mean, you can affect attack rolls and ability checks or skill checks. Some things, so there are some times where actually that would be really useful. There was a time where we were involved in, we got grappled and we're getting pushed off the side of this cliff. And actually, I applied advantage with Silvery Barbs with a secondary effect so that my party member did not get pushed off the cliff face and fall to their death. Now, what am I applying it to? Well, it's the shove action. And the shove action is an ability or skill check, right? So Silvery Barbs can affect that. Not only that, I could affect the role the Dungeon Master was taking, and I could also affect the role that the player was making. Like, kind of cool. Maybe the timing on that's a little bit out, but I know I did something like that. And I wasn't the only one. Anyway, where are we? Okay, so you're saying Silvery Barbs is an okay spell for a DM that never goes above level 5 or 6. But if your player... No, I think that the spell was way too powerful at lower levels, lower than that level. Honestly, I don't agree that Silvery Barbs is weak at all, even at the low level. It maybe get even better at higher levels, but it's really good at low level as well. Archer's Friend, how's it going? I am only using Silvery Barbs for NPCs against the PCs. It's fun. It can be fun. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it is a time where if you're running a campaign where you're dealing with a lot of spell casting NPCs and there's not a lot of monsters involved, it's actually probably the right time to have Silvery Barbs in the game because it's a dueling spell. Trax Daddy 318, hello. Fey Ancestry, great for anyone to learn the spell. Yep. If you were trying to getting the spell's not hard. Rational Ginger. Yeah, I wouldn't be allowing it in any campaign I run. Spell is way too OP, opposed for especially for the spell level. Well, yeah, even the spell level 1's not a big deal. Frankly, I didn't find level 1 to be terribly off-putting. Level 2, not really off-putting. Level 3, I mean the spell level. What are you going to do? I mean, how it is such an encompassing and all-encompassing spell. I mean, what are you going to do with that thing? Archer's Friend. If I'm going to use Silvery Barbs, I wouldn't change it at all. I just run it for a spellcasting campaign where you're fighting mages. Yeah. Archer's Friend. What do you got here? Any new D&D comes out with, I use it on the players first. Then I let them decide if we use it. Okay, so in other words, if they can take it, then they can use it. Right, I see what you're doing with that, Archer's Friend. Big Clue. Hello, how's it going? Hey, Fred. Glad to catch you live again. Well, I'm glad you are able to. I'm assuming that your work schedule has changed. Yeah, things seem to be doing all right. Not too bad. I've got a Dungeon Master round table very, very shortly in just over an hour. Time zones have sort of changed. It's no longer daylight savings here. So it's now, yeah, the difference in the time zones across the countries is so massive now. Going to make the Dungeon Master round table very interesting for me. Okay. Big Kid. Cutting words. D6 Bardic Inspiration. Average is 7.7. Okay. For a D20. and Barbs is 7 average for a d20 roll, but it adds advantage and reroll aspect takes away a possible crit. Yep, that's true. Sorry, but Bardic Inspiration, cutting words, it's nothing like what you can do with this. I don't feel like it's on the same par at all. Okay. Zycam has got a question. Good. Let's see. Finally a question. As a DM, players shutting down the BBEG every round can be game breaking. Well, it's not just game breaking, it's a bit frustrating. Would you increase the number of enemies or BBEG's CR to keep it more challenging for a party with Silvery Barbs? Well, you could, but it'll be a waste of time. It won't make any difference. It just won't make any difference. Silvery Barbs affects everything that the monster does, other than a legendary resistance. Like, what's the point? I just don't see there being a way of making it work. As I said, the only time the spell for me is going to work is in like a Harry Potter mage battle campaign. But like what you do at your table is up to you. I mean, I may not have the solution. I mean, I play tested it for months, but it's not like the dungeon master was like, okay, so they're using Silvery Barbs. How do I pump up the difficulty? He didn't really do that. We just left it just to see what would happen. So I probably can't give you that from the perspective of actual experience. I doubt there's anybody out there who can right now because the spell is so new. Samuel, could you nerf Silvery Barbs to make it less OP? Probably not. The reason being is it affects so many things. I mean, if I really wanted to be a dick, I could use Silvery Barbs on one of my party members and make one of their saving throws, attack rolls, or skill checks, ability checks fail. Make them re-roll it. I can do that to any of the Dungeon Master's monsters as long as I can see them. And then I give advantage to my ally. Like, seriously. I mean, how all-encompassing as a mechanical dice roll can you get? It doesn't get... I just don't see the point, Sam. So Samuel, I just don't see the point in trying to make it less OP. I would just use the spell when you're playing the right type of campaign and then just ditch it. Or just bear it and grin it and like, oh well, I guess I don't have to really worry too much about trying to make tough encounters because it's not going to be much point. I would consider it way too much hassle to try to do anything with it. Okay. Lewis Perez. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Couldn't care less. Lewis, it doesn't matter that shield is for a full round and that Silvery Barbs is only for one dice roll. It made no difference whatsoever. No difference whatsoever. Okay? So if you're thinking that is an argument for it, nah. No, it isn't. I'm sorry. Okay? It just isn't. The only time you can use shield is if you're a spellcaster, right? And in those very rare situations where you're in the front line and you're using shield and you're a tank with a very specific build, then of course Silvery Barbs is not the right tool. But every other time, shield being a full round means nothing. Absolutely nothing. So what? Hello, so what? I made a Gish. I have a 19 AC, and I plan to use shield, and if the monsters crit, I use Silvery Barbs. Right, okay. I can use the DM's roll because we use the roll 20. I don't plan on being hit. Exactly. So what? That's exactly it. I didn't plan on being hit. I made sure that I was not the target of ranged attacks. So I positioned myself Now, one of the things is you can't stand behind total cover and have Silvery Barbs be effective, because you have to have line of sight on the creatures when the Dungeon Master takes their turn. Okay? Otherwise, it's not going to work. That's all I can say. Already answered the question, Sam. Okay, next. Colbin. I would remove saves at the very least. Make them miss an attack is much less powerful than make them miss a save for suggestion that lasts 8 hours. Well, I mean, there are a lot of spells out there, like Banishment's a saving throw, right? Not an attack roll. A lot of the higher level spells certainly are saving throw dependent. Frankly, I just don't think the spell is Silvery Barbs once you mess with it. That's all. I think the spell is really useful in the right type of campaign. Experiencing Vietnam. Question. Did using this spell often take a lot of fun away from the DM? Look, my Dungeon Master, I've known him a long time. Okay, we take turns. Everybody in my home group, we take a turn. It's not my turn right now. And the guy, I've been playing with him for years. But he had a discussion with me and he said, look, I know you run a YouTube channel. I know you would like to talk about this thing. I'll let you play test it in the group. And I said, okay, dude, but you know I'm going to thrash it. And he said, I know you will, Fred. And I was like, okay, well, let's see how long this lasts. So 3 hours later, he said, yeah, this is too powerful. And I said, okay, so we finished? And he said, no, you can keep using it until you feel like you've collected enough data. It did take a lot of it made it very difficult for my Dungeon Master to challenge us. Frankly, I don't think it was possible. I suspect that there were times where he thought he had a situation which we would find difficult, and it just unraveled. It's amazing how just 2 dice rolls can make all the difference. And it did. But the fact that you can affect so many different dice rolls too. Amazing. Frankly, amazing. So absolutely. Okay, Big Kid. Yeah, Big Kid, that's right. But again, if you're casting shield, like, how does shield work? Do people remember? Like, let's have a look, shall we? This is the problem with the spell. I know how the spell works, but I'm opening it up for effect. How's that? I'll take my glasses off. I'm taking my glasses off because I'm being serious now. Okay, we're being serious. Let's have a look at shield. Oh, here we go. Let's look at the most important aspect of shield. It's nothing else that it does. The only thing that's important is ranges self. So only the person casting the spell can target on themselves. Your spellcaster is not the target. It's somebody else. That's what I found, is it was everybody else who was getting targeted, not my spellcaster. It was more important to ensure their safety than my own. How's that sound? So it doesn't matter. Okay. Okay, so what else have we got here? Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum. Oh, right, so here we go. Okay, so here we go. I'm trying to just look through this. Sorry if I got lost a little bit in the questions here. Lewis, Barbs is only OP if more than one person takes it held. No, not really. No, not at all. There are encounters where the person who had the spell didn't actually use it, and only I did. And mate, it was still too good. Because he had fewer spells available than I did, and I had more because he was a half caster. I think he was a half caster, or he had multi-classed or something like that. I think he had multi-classed. So as a result of that, he had less spells to call on, and he ran out before I did. So as a result of that, in those situations, didn't matter that I was the only one using Silvery Barbs. Didn't make a difference. Not at all. No, I don't agree. Lewis, sorry, I don't agree with that. We can disagree though. It's all right. Zycam, question. Did you find Silvery Barbs became a crutch for the party or made the party less creative in solving problems or planning tactics? Oh, shit. Damn it. Yeah. Yeah, we did. We did. I'd already keyed it up. Cantrip on my turn. Silvery Barbs on the Dungeon Master's turn. Yeah, it did. It did. We really, it was a crutch. I tell you, man, it was hard to see that spell disappear from our table. I was like, oh shit, what have I done? I should have just dragged it out a little bit longer. And yeah, and the other player who really didn't want it to leave the party. Yeah, it was a tough. It was tough to lose that spell. But you're right. We didn't really try to solve that many problems. We got a little bit less creative and planning tactics. I mean, we are a tactics group, so we do actually plan things out. Yeah. So yeah, it was a crutch. It became a pretty big crutch. Hi, Fred Hubber. How's it going? I put undecided in the poll. Had not read the spell, changed my mind to banned. The effects are close to 3rd or 4th level power. Well, I mean, I think they're close to nothing else like in the game. Like, is there anything else like this in the game? There just isn't. So, I mean, frankly, I'd be quite happy to cast this spell as a 3rd level spell, even potentially a 4th level spell if I'm high enough level and I want somebody else's spell to go off. I mean, making the monster just banish, like, bye-bye, see a demon, go back to the abyss. Like sweet, that's the end of that. So what? The DM has infinite everything. If you feel challenged as a DM, you're doing it wrong. Yeah, I don't really aspire to any of that nonsense. I'm not going to tell people that sort of stuff, so forget it. Read it out, don't agree with it. Moving on. No name. Also, why I take either divination, chronology. Well, yeah. The divination wizard couldn't really hold up to that spell. I mean, what's the point? It didn't really matter. Yeah, and Matthew Mercer's wizard is very powerful. Oh, whatever. It didn't matter. We never used that stuff anyway. You know, most of us don't use his stuff. Experiencing Vietnam. Question. Also, did the DM ever use the spell against the party? No, he didn't use the spell against the party. He didn't use the spell against the party. Now, would it have changed things if he did use it against the party? I can assure you there had been a few of us who would have been pissed. Is that immature on our part? Absolutely. I think if it had been a situation occur where it had occurred, it's too much to speculate. I don't know. I do not know. I don't know. I can't give you an answer exactly on that because we never did it. Okay? He never actually pulled the spell out on us. And I know he did that deliberately. But it wouldn't have mattered. How many spellcasters is he going to control? We had 2 with the spell. Usually the players will outnumber the Dungeon Master with that spell. It's just how it is. No fun. No name, sorry. And sometimes the Lucky Feet is useful. Yeah, I'm not saying that the Lucky Feet isn't useful, but I'm saying that Silvery Barbs is like better than Lucky Feet and overrides it. That's right, it does. It can counter a crit. I just said that not so long ago. Can sorcerers convert all their points into 1st level slots just for this? Oh, shit. Yeah, they could. They could do that. If you've got Coffee Lock, then the Coffee Lock, I'm not going to explain how the Coffee Lock works, but if you had a Coffee Lock and you were using this spell, oh my gosh, eek, it'd be scary. Like, is there anything you could deal with? to stop that sorcerer. I don't know that there is, frankly. I mean, everybody can say, oh, the Dungeon Master can have rocks fall and they just have to change. Well, but it's bollocks. Bullshit. I mean, seriously, there's a limit to what Dungeon Masters can do before they piss off their players. That's a reality. Okay? So sometimes it's just better not to go there. Okay. Colborne. Can sorcerers convert? Convert. I've already done that. Take the feat for extra sorcery points and the feat for an extra cast of first level spell to top it off. Dear. This is fun watching the DM roll dice every combat and is no way wasting time. Dear. Okay, all right. Man, it looks like I can almost see the bottom of the chat. There's at least a question there. That's good. Yeah, Ray Wilson, you're right. It is just better than Bardic Inspiration. Well, I mean, you can do that and see what happens. Frankly, at high level games, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. If their top level spell is a fourth level slot, then it would probably affect them. It would probably affect my decision to use the spell if I have to cast a level 4 spell and the only thing I have at my highest level is level 4. You're right. I would probably make a different decision. But level 3 is probably not low enough to change my mind in some cases. And you want to take away the saves as well? Yeah. Feels like an awful lot of work. I feel like if a spell needs too many changes and adjustments and homebrewing, just for me, I just won't bother with it. I'll just use that option in a different game when it's appropriate to use that. And I mean, I do that same thing with subclasses, feats, stuff like that. If it doesn't seem to work, it can come out and they can go back in when it needs to work. But yeah, it's weird. I don't ban a lot of things at my table, or we don't really ban a lot of things at our table. What has my group banned? We've banned the Gloomstalker Ranger. We played through that for a whole campaign and decided in the end it was just way too good. It's funny when people say, oh, Rangers are garbage. Like, you have no idea. And I think the Rangers are still a very good class without the Gloomstalker, but the Gloomstalker just dominate. And then Elven Accuracy. We had a whole campaign with Elven Accuracy. In the end, we was like, no, it's just ridiculous. It's got to go. And then we got rid of the Grappler feat. And I know a lot of people get confused. I got pissed off with the Grappler feat, primarily because it meant you have to have the Grappler feat to be able to grapple and lock in and pin somebody down. So you can grapple as normal. Anybody can grapple, right? But it just slows down your movement. But if you want to restrain them, you need to have the Grappler feat. And I just thought that was ridiculous. Like, all of those classes would have some sort of fighting skills. Like, it's part of 101 martial arts. I know because I used to teach it. Okay? And so you learn those sorts of things. Throwing and grappling is part of it. Unless, of course, you're playing in a martial arts or involved in a martial arts that's very splintered. But if you're playing in a complete, then it's different. You learn everything. And you just get better at it. So it didn't make any sense. So when we removed the grappler feat, it meant that everybody could try to grapple somebody, not just slow down their movement, but then use another action next round, or if they had multiple actions, to lock down and pin them. We just made another grapple check to secure them. And I felt that was a much better and more elegant way to run the game rather than have a sodding feat. That was just my opinion. It's how we did it. Have we banned anything else? No. Oh, Silvery Barbs. That's the only other one. that was it. Okay, what do you got here, Sam? Thanks for answering my question. You're welcome. I answered it twice because I forgot the hashtag. It's all right. I didn't notice. It's right. I didn't freak out. Thank you. And thank you for your input and your patience too. I know I've been a bit harsh with some of the things that I've said with regard to how the spell works, but I'm not talking I am not talking out of my arse. I actually use the spell. Okay, we used it for a while. Ray, what do you got here? Yeah, take away the advantage could make it a generalized version of inspiration for sorcerer and wizard. See, I don't like it when we decide to shit or piss all over another class feature. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of what makes the bard good. And if we give it to this, like the wizard doesn't need anything else. Why would we worry about giving it to the wizard? Why would we give it to the sorcerer? The sorcerer's got a lot of good things. I mean, there's some problems with the sorcerer, but why would we give them more of something that is, frankly, I would think is the thing that bards should be really good at doing, right? Anyway, so what? Question, here we go. Both Silvery Barbs and Counterspell have 60-foot range. Yep. Do you think that was a design choice to try and keep wizards in range of each other and to drain their spells faster? Really good question. So what? Absolutely. Silvery Barbs is a dueling spell. It's not a mistake that you're finding it in the Strixhaven Curriculum of Chaos book, because that book is about a wizard school, right? It's about a mage caster school. That's what it is. That's the adventure. It's really a rip-off of Harry Potter. I mean, the Strixhaven lore itself there's hardly anything in Magic the Gathering. It's all but non-existent. Frankly, it's garbage. They didn't really build anything at all for this Strixhaven book. But it's a reflection of, we know that people like Harry Potter and they will love this. For me, I don't want to go back to school. I don't care if it's a magic school or not. So it is definitely that. It's there because it's a dueling spell. Okay? It is deliberately designed specifically so that wizards, mages, sorcerers, bards, even a warlock, even a cleric can war against each other. Like, that's the whole point behind it, that spell. That's what it is. So yeah, it was absolutely a design choice. Gromax, hello Gromax. At some point, 3 casters and party that I DM had this on. Yeah, they burnt slots fast though. Yes, they did. I did too. And I was constantly trying to get them to take short rests. And when the short rest didn't get back enough spell slots, it was a long rest time. And we would go back to our sailing ship and rest on the ship, and then go all the way back to wherever it was, which is quite normal. I mean, it's stupid to try to stay and take a long rest or a short rest in a dangerous location like a tomb, a dungeon, the place you're exploring, because usually there's dangers there. So absolutely, they will rest more, for sure, and they will burn through them fast as. But what are you going to do as a dungeon master? I suppose you could say, or even though you go all the way back to the ship, or you can't go back to the ship and rest and take a long rest, even though it's a perfectly safe place to be, I'm going to have a random encounter to mess with you. I mean, seriously, there is a point even that taking player agency away. I've never liked the idea of, if the players make a good choice about where they rest, I'm not going to let them rest. I've done it before. Why would I go back to doing that? If you're doing that, it's fine. You keep doing it. Okay? Gromax, they were annoyed when enemies started using same spell. Yeah, Gromax, I can see us having the same experience. I mean, we're a pretty good group who get along pretty well, but I can absolutely see myself getting angry if my dungeon master used a spell against me. But also, too, I think that Counterspell is a very bad spell, too. I think Counterspell shuts down fun for everybody. Do you know what I mean? I kind of miss the days where we had to rely on Dispel Magic for everything, and some things we could not stop. Do you know what I mean? You know what the normal process we used to use for stopping a wizard from casting a spell was? Is we would use Magic Missile. What we would do, Okay, rather than using Counterspell, we would use a first level slot, magic missile. Wasn't going to hit, always going to do damage. And we would target the spellcaster. I'm going to target that spellcaster. If they cast a spell, I cast magic missile on them, and they would lose their spell. That's how we stopped and blocked spells. Now that method for dealing with spellcasters is gone. It's not necessary anymore because you've got Counterspell. You probably could still use it in the game, particularly when you're dealing with a concentration spell. But the mechanics for the game in the past were also situated a particular way that you could interrupt spellcasters. Well, now the only way to interrupt a spellcaster is with a reaction using a spell, essentially, right? So a very different way of playing the game, and the game mechanics have changed over the time. Okay, so I think I came through this. Zycam, I appreciate your insight. Now, I am sorry I included Silvery Barbs in a wizard spell book the PC wizard found last week. Oops, there goes the game. Okay, so look, be adults. Just talk, just go talk to them. Just say, look, I think this is probably not a good idea. You know, just because I've told you this, you may find that your players don't use the spell like I did, or other people would. If you're a Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers League, I guarantee it's going to happen. Okay? But here's the thing. I've always said, always try everything twice before you decide to ditch it. So Zycam or anybody else is using the spell right now and you now have reservations about it, just use the spell. Explain to your players, this is playtesting. I'm not sure about the spell. It may need to go. Play it out, and when you're sort of well and truly satisfied that it's just not going to work, just say, look, this spell needs to come out of the game. Do you know what I mean? We did that with Elven Accuracy. We played it for over a year, and then we took it out of the game. We said, nah, it's too much. We had Gloomstalker Ranger for ages as well, like over a year, and then we took it out of the game. You could just let the test go. Do you know what I mean? Just let the test go. And just explain to your players before your head's starting to go, like, I'm not too sure about the spell. I'm going to put it in the game. We'll see how it goes. If it's not going to work, I'm going to take it out. Okay? I'm sorry, I'm kind of losing my voice a little bit. Okay, question here. Gromax, thank you for your feedback, by the way, Gromax. It's good to get the feedback that you gave. 3 casters in a party and their responses. Not always going to be the same response for everybody, but really useful. Your question. Would you run a BBEG that has 10 caster minions with only the spell? I'm not going to say that I wouldn't do that. Okay? Now, on my channel, when I give advice and I say it's probably not a good idea to do something, it's probably because I've already done it. Okay, so I'm not going to say that I wouldn't do that, but would I do that repeatedly? Probably not. So to give you an idea, Gromax, this is where everybody runs away. I have thrown a Tarrasque against a level 1 group. No, it did not go well. But not in the way you were thinking. Okay? I have thrown 9 red dragons at a single player character who was a monk in a desperate attempt to see if I could at least kill him, because he was asking for it. He just walked out to no man's land and said, bring it on. And I was like, fine. Dragon army on the side, here we go. So I've done that. I have included all sorts of bizarre things in my games that seem incredibly unfair. And I have not necessarily repeated those decisions over time. It's like you kind of break a few eggs along the way. But my opinion and how I deal with character death and how you play the game, and I don't really view Dungeons and Dragons as a true game of skill because there's dice rolling involved. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you could say probability, that's part of it. So, you know, I'm not that worried when it's not like, the players failed. It's because I made things too tough. Well, it probably was, but does that really matter? What do you guys want to do? You want to make new characters? Cool. You want to use the same characters? Fine. So I'm quite happy to make an omelette every once in a while in my game. And my players know this. They know that I will do some crazy shit. It's just how it is. Okay. And they also know that I will be fairly tame at times as well. But they also know that I'm not invested in putting notches on my belt and then parading it around that much. It's just how do you create drama? And that's all I want to do is create drama for a short time, for a long time, and then move back into the next part of the story. Now, Fred's retracted that. I'm almost out of time, and I will have to go very shortly because I'm supposed to be with Wally DM and Dicely D&D and Flute Sloot very shortly. Okay, Solomon Wiggins, hello. Where are you to? Were you to kill the monk with the dragon army? Were you able? Yeah, not with the breath weapon though. It was impossible. He was level 15, I believe. He's either level 15 or 16. Could not kill that monk with the breath weapon from the dragons. Had to use bites and claws. It took a lot of rounds. I think was it 5 or 6 rounds, maybe even more. Took a long time. It was so hard. Did the monk player get upset? Not in the slightest. He made another character almost identical and called him his brother. And his brother decided to go on a journey to save his brother who had died from the dragons and resurrect him, which he did eventually. So, you know, everybody was happy in the end. Gromax, Trask, let me stock 1,000 arrows to Aarakocra Archer. Dear. Well, you know, it could, you know, I suppose that'll work. But knowing me, I'd probably put wings on the Trask. That's just how it is. flying Trasks. What do you got here, Fred? Party walks out for a rest. Even a short rest, I'll partially repopulate the dungeon. Yes, repopulating the dungeon is another approach if people go and rest. And I only repopulate a dungeon if it makes sense to be repopulated. That's just for me. Or I will move and readjust where the monsters are, or the population of that dungeon. Okay? So that it's probably going to be much harder the next time people come back. And that's part and parcel of playing the game. You know that if you take a rest. You know? It's like, oh, we found, there's a few dead bodies around here. Oh, there's a few people missing. When they go and do their patrol. So absolutely, by all means. Okay, I think we have covered this to death. Oh, I should probably tell you what's happening next week. So, what's happening now? Next week, I am going to probably talk about Wally DM's puzzle book. If I don't do that, I'm probably going to talk about the broken one. Dungeons and Dragons lore, how to use it in combat, but a lot of lore, no mechanics. No mechanics. But I will try to get you a stat block for 5e rather than the older version, since the monster is not around anymore. Okay? In terms of it's not in the game, it's part of the older games, okay? So the broken one. I think the broken one is a very good addition to a Curse of Strahd adventure. The mongrel men, which are now called mongrel folk, are another one, but the broken one is even better. I think you'll like it a lot. Now, if I don't do that, it'll be, as I said, Wally DM's puzzle book. Now, what's going to happen after that? From now on, you'll find on my channel, there will probably, at some point, I do not know when, I will probably talk about the Gloomstalker Ranger and how to build one that is so bat crazy it's not funny. I'm not going to promise when I'm going to do that. It just doesn't happen. Okay? They're not the most fun thing for me to do. What I do want to do is player guides on high-level play, but when I say high-level play, not necessarily high-level play. Could be, but player guides on followers, not Dungeon Master, but for players. Dungeon Masters should use this, pass it on to your players, you'll find that useful. For followers, using guilds, using vehicles, using strongholds, running a business, acquiring legendary magic items, okay, legendary magic items, talking with gods. What else was there? I think that was it. There might be a few other things. So very broad in its nature, but always focused on a player guide. There's no point in me making a Dungeon Master guide because it's not the Dungeon Masters who need all that advice. It's the players. When you're playing these sorts of things, there's a lot of book work and a lot of work on your part as a player. And if you're a Dungeon Master, you'll probably discover this, or you already know this. If you're a player, you need that information. So it's going to be targeted for them. Now, after that, you're probably going to see eventually, I don't know when, I'm not going to promise when, I will eventually talk about Call of the Netherdeep. I got the book. But it's going to be a lot of monster lore, a lot of how to use monsters in your game, how they work in the game, a lot of monsters you've never seen before, a lot of old monsters, okay? That's just sort of where I decided it was time to go. And then as soon as the Lighthall Dungeons and Dragons courses come out, so for those of you who are running through Lost Mine of Phandelver, I am building you a program for the Lost Mine of Phandelver. It's an 8-week program. It's free at this point. It will be announced very shortly, in a week or two, probably 2 weeks. I'm just printing out all the maps to full size, which tell me it's not good. It's hard. And it will be a explanation of how to run those areas and locations in the Lost Mine of Phandelver, a demonstration and practice. That's right. I will run some of you through it. On Lighthall, not YouTube. Lighthall will pay me, YouTube won't. Free to sign up. I'll let you know about it. I've also built a Monster Tactics program. 8 weeks, and then a cycle through, and there'll be some different monsters. And it basically explains to you how to use the monster in 5e in a battle, and it will demonstrate and some practice. I will also explain to you how to defeat the monster. For those of you who are players who find that more useful, or at least Dungeon Masters need to know how you defeat the monster as well. So I'll explain to you some of the best ways to deal with defeating those monsters. Okay, so that's another program. That's the Monster Combat Tactics. Then there's the Dungeon Master Prep. Dungeon Master Prep is a little different. Although it will do a cycle of about 7 weeks at this point, and then start again, okay? Hydro, I also printed out a full-size map of Wave Echo Cave. It was 8 feet long. Yeah, I don't know what to do about that one. It's not good. It's not good. I have to chop it up in pieces. I don't know. I'll come up with it. But I'm going to use miniatures. It's just going to happen. Sorry. Anyway, the other thing is, like I said, the Dungeon Master Prep will cover building the structure of an adventure. There will be explanation, there'll be demonstration, and we'll do one. We'll make one, okay? And every time I run through this again, we'll do a different adventure. I'll do how to scratch build monsters for 5e, how to make magic items from scratch. We'll also do locations, so how to build and create locations. I use a lot of real world stuff. We'll get there. So I've got some ideas for that. Almost ready to go. How to make your own non-player characters. Very important. So that's going to come up. And then how to improvise. I'm going to teach people how to improvise. So explanation, demonstration, and practice as part of the class. I can bring you into the classroom. That's what Lighthall allows me to do. Okay, and then once that happens, this is all online. I'm going to run, as part of the DM prep, I'm going to explain, demonstrate, and we're going to build skill challenge. And every time I go through, we'll build a new skill challenge. Okay, we'll see how that goes. The only other program is how do the core rules work, explanation, demonstration. Okay, core rules, there's probably 3-week program, the basics, combat, magic, and then we'll move on. And yeah, that's what the future holds. And I better get going because I'm supposed to be setting up a Zoom call and I haven't. My gosh, what am I doing? Taking too long here. Okay, right. Hey, thank you to everybody. You guys have been awesome. Where is this? Oh, it's let's is it that one that we want, or we want this one? No, we'll do this one. This is funnier. Okay, so thank you to my patrons. Thank you to everybody else who has been part of this. And look, wherever you are in the world, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.